The best Big 12 possible. A bigger Big 12. We appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. Please like the video and subscribe. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. It's realignment week here at the Voice of College Football. Check out the videos on the Big 10 and the SEC. And also keep in mind that we are not done in regards to one particular model or format for each conference. So this is not me making predictions about where this is going to land. As we've said in the past, we have taken realignment seriously to the degree that we're not on here throwing crap at the fan every day talking realignment. Only when there's news do we discuss realignment. In this week, though, we're throwing out all sorts of models to see what you think about the various possibilities of where the Big 12, the ACC, if it exists in the future, the SEC and the Big 10 could land. And we're making reasonable projections here. So with the Big 12 has attacked this problem, going back to Bob Bowlesby and also the leadership of Brett Yormark in trying to keep up with the Big 10 and the SEC by throwing quantity at it. They, of course, added the 4 schools once they lost Oklahoma and Texas, the 4 schools from the basically group of 5. And then this past season, of course, it was Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah from the Pac-12, which will debut in 2024. So the Big 12 is no longer the Big 12, really, in size. It's the Big 16. So once we started to add schools and look at football programs that would add value to the Big 12, I said, why not? Let's double the Big 12. Let's go to the Big 24. So it's the Big 12 at 24. And this is the best possible outcome for the Big 12. Best possible outcome from the standpoint of keeping up with the Power 2. Now, forget Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia. I do not see in any way that those 4 will go to the Big 12. Florida State, Clemson, football powers that are headed to either the SEC or the Big 10. North Carolina is a coveted school basketball program, and the state of North Carolina for the SEC or possibly the Big 10. And Virginia seems to be the school that is latest linked as kind of the UCLA to USC for Virginia, North Carolina. The Cavaliers could luck out in this whole deal. It's a fine school, excellent basketball program. The football has been awful for much of its history. So let's take those 4 schools off the grid. Let's understand that basically we're looking at a collapse of the ACC. We're looking at those 4 leaving. Then the ACC's down to 13, and it's a weak 13 to try to keep in competition with the other conferences. And they've already been knocked down to a 58-32 split between Big 10 SEC, 58% of the playoff revenue, and ACC and Big 12 at 32%. So they're already by far a second-class citizen. So they lose their 4 top programs. Arguably, I know Miami, North Carolina, we could have an argument there. But the ACC would most likely at that point collapse or try reinforce itself by grabbing the likes of, let's say, Memphis and Tulane to try to, again, reinforce the conference. But we'll focus on the Big 12 here. And these are the additions. So we're going from 16 to 24 with these 8. Let's start with the backyard brawl. The Pitt Panthers. What do they have? Well, they've been a top 25 program generally under Pat Narduzzi. So they played some really good football. Their best football the past few years, aside from 2023 when they went 3-9, that Pitt football has given us since the late 1980s. And if you've been around for a while, say 50 years, you know that Pitt in the 70s and early 80s was a national power. They are high on the list historically in regards to national championships, All-Americans, a really good football program historically, major market, even though it's owned by the Steelers, of course. They would have that Big East rivalry feel, not just with West Virginia as one of the great rivalries in college football. The backyard brawl would be an in-conference game, which would give it even more meat there. But that Big East feel with a rivalry with Cincinnati right there. Steelers, Bengals, Pitt, Cincinnati. Follow us there. Pitt added to the Big 12. Also, another West Virginia rival, Going way back, Virginia Tech. The football brand is strong, of course, thanks to Frank Beamer. It was stronger in the 90s and through the 2000s up until Beamer's retirement. Virginia Tech trying to come back under Brent Pry with a nice season here in 2023 and look to improve. So we know that they've got a rabid fan base. They show up for the games. They sell out. They love their Virginia Tech football. So Virginia Tech, West Virginia, they work well in that region as well as the Big 12 expands to the east. More old Big East flavor here with Louisville. Strong football program. And they've got connections with Pitt and Cincinnati and others. They've been good in recent years. And of course, they just went to an ACC championship game this past season under head coach Jeff Brom. So add Louisville to the mix as our fourth addition to the Big 12. And what football program in the ACC most reminds me of Louisville on that same tier? NC State, 23-11 the past few seasons in conference play under Dave Doeren, 9-4 last season overall. This has been a much improved football program in recent years under Dave Doeren. And with the SEC possibly claiming its stake, or maybe the Big Ten getting North Carolina, this would be the Big 12 being able to go into that prized state. So think North Carolina and think wealth and population. This is one of the fastest growing areas of the country, one of the biggest growing states in regards to, again, not just sheer population, but wealth going to North Carolina. It's a desired location, and a lot of emerging major markets like Winston-Salem, Raleigh, and of course Charlotte could be attained here by the Big 12 in getting NC State. So the Big 12 gets a stake in North Carolina with NC State. And if you're going to bring in NC State, which is not the equal of North Carolina, meaning UNC, why not bring in a basketball rival in Duke? The Big 12 fashions itself as the best basketball conference. And further that brand on the basketball side, the football can be decent at Duke. They were under Mike Elko those two seasons in 2022 and 2023. So with the right football coach, they can be good. Now, whether anybody cares about it in the state of North Carolina, that's another matter. Again, it's about basketball, and you bring a connection with NC State and Duke basketball together to the Big 12. And of course, the academic reputation of Duke would be a coup for the Big 12 to add right there. Also, let's stay in the ACC and let's go to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech with a bad football reputation now, but let's not let recency bias get in our way. Georgia Tech, from the time the Yellow Jackets joined the ACC through the tenure of Paul Johnson, we're going to ACC championship games. We're playing high-level top 25 football. Went to the Orange Bowl in 2009 and 2014. This can be a good football program. They're not that far away from being another West Virginia, Kansas State type of program in the Big 12. Also keep in mind Atlanta and what Atlanta brings. It's an NFL city, yes. So they're not crazy about Georgia Tech football, but it brings sheer population. And the Big 12 would be able to match at least some territory with Georgia. I know that sounds like a joke with the SEC, but Georgia's at its zenith. Keep that in mind. And Georgia Tech, of course, challenged Georgia on the field last year. But we're talking about NFL talent in that city of Atlanta, plus a major market size for the Big 12 and a really good school for the Big 12. So Georgia Tech, another ACC defector going to the Big 12. And then we've got really the crown jewel of the class, and that's Miami. So Miami doesn't want to go to the Big 12. Miami wants to land in the Big 10. They just got their AAU status, which gives them another reason, another poker chip to land in the Big 10. Also the SEC, of course, with Miami. So from a sheer football standpoint, for those of us that remember the greatness of Miami, know about the brand of Miami, know how many Miami fans are still out there nationwide, despite what we see at Hard Rock Stadium with nobody in the stands, Miami seems like that they would be a great get for the Big Ten or the SEC, especially for the Big Ten to pair with Florida State, and also from a recruiting standpoint, because the Big Ten footprint in the Midwest needs more football players, and you go to Florida for that. So I have long since and many of you know this from listening to us here at the Voice of College Football, way before even realignment got started, I was encouraging the Big Ten to go to Florida to get Miami and Florida State. But it appears as though, what's the SEC want to do with, let's say they get Florida State and they've got Florida and Florida State. Do they really need Miami? They've got a foothold in Florida. If the Big Ten expands with, let's say, Notre Dame and Florida State, do they really need Miami? I would still make that pursuit myself. But it's a small school. They don't draw. And again, the football's been lousy. The recruiting's still good, even better than it has been in 20 years under Mario Cristobal, but it has yet to be displayed and manifested on the field. So Miami could be in a odd situation where they don't want to go to the Big 12, but the Big 10 says, no, we've had enough. We're good at 20, let's say. And the SEC may make a similar call looking at Miami. So Miami may get shut out of the Big 2 and go to the Big 12. And of course, that would be huge for Brett Yormark and the Big 12. And finally, they would elevate from the group of 5 to a couple seasons in the ACC. They've yet to play in the ACC, but now they would be back at home where they belong. They've got a Southwest Conference history, and of course, that's SMU. They've got ties to this conference, this Big 12, with Houston, TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech, teams that they played on a regular basis going back into the 1980s and before as members, again, of the Southwest Conference. SMU is so bent on being a power brand in college football and playing with the big boys that they're not even receiving a revenue share for the first, I believe, 5 seasons out of the ACC. So that's a freebie for the Big 12. They could pluck SMU, not have to pay them, get another Texas team to pair with the 4 I just mentioned, and they get a market share along with TCU in Dallas, even though, again, it's owned by the Dallas Cowboys. It's much like Pitt taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know it's a big mismatch. They are pretty much invisible to the Dallas market, but it's still SMU in the Dallas market playing some better teams, some better competition, some brands that people recognize, at least in the state of Texas. And SMU doing this all at the right time because they're coming off an American Conference Championship in which they went 9-0 in the conference. They're playing their best football with Sonny Dykes and now Rhett Lashley as the head coach than they have since the scandal of the mid-'80s. All the way up to 24 with Pitt, Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, Duke, Georgia Tech, Miami, and SMU. Now comes the fun part, but the tough part. Rarely does this work out perfectly. Trying to divide these expanded conferences into divisions. All right, let's give it a shot with 3 8-team divisions. We go to the Big 12 Eastern Division. This all makes sense right here. You've got that faction from the old Big East with West Virginia, Pitt, Cincinnati, Louisville, Virginia Tech. A lot of rivalries right there. Regionality works well. And then Virginia Tech obviously has a connection with NC State, with Duke, with Georgia Tech from the ACC. So really good mix of teams right there that make a whole lot of sense playing each other out of the new Big 12 Eastern Division. Now the Big 12 Central looks much like the old Big 12 with standbys Oklahoma State, TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech. Add Houston and SMU with that old Southwest Conference feel that also matches the Big 12 and that vibe. Now, UCF and Miami, I know that doesn't make any sense, and I know it doesn't go together, but at least we keep those two together. And certainly let me know down in the comments section what you would do to fix any of this. So I always receive a lot of comments that, Mark, you did this wrong. Mark, you did that wrong. Mark, you're stupid. That doesn't make any sense. Those teams don't fit together. If you're going to leave any suggestions down in the comments section about how this new Big 12 should be aligned, you need to not just address one little problem here or say those two teams should be together or they shouldn't be together. You need to configure the entire conference. But I am certainly open to your suggestions. Let's go to the Big 12 Western Division. All this makes total sense. You keep these rivalries together with Arizona, Arizona State, Utah and Colorado, Utah and BYU, Kansas, Kansas State. They are rivals with Iowa State, of course, from the old Big 12. So all of this works with the West. With the East, it's just that UCF, Miami, twosome in the Central Division don't really work anywhere, but at least we keep the Sunshine State teams together. 8 teams in a division, meaning you've got 7 opponents. Therefore, you're going to play 9 conference games. So you play 2 teams from the other 2 divisions. So you play one from the other division and one from the other division. You've got 3 division winners, and you go with a wild card, the team with the best record that finished in second place, to play a mini playoff toward the conference championship game. 24 is a nice number for tournaments, and therefore for the division structure here. Way too many teams. Too many teams you don't play in your own conference, but still it's a nice number to work with. So you can go 3 divisions with 8 teams, or you can go with 4 divisions of 6 teams each. Again, I'll take your suggestions down in the comment section. So let's head out west first, because we're going to leave the problem to the end. The Western Division looks amazing. Arizona. So let's head out to the Western Division first and foremost, and we will save the issue to the end. Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, BYU, of course, with Utah. I know that Iowa State is a bit of an add-on, but that is the best we could do. Look at the Central Division. It's basically a Texas division. Houston, Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, SMU, and old Big 12 rival with TCU, Baylor, and Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. The Atlantic Division, very nice. Looks like the ACC. Virginia Tech. They've got rivalries and connections there with NC State, Duke, Georgia Tech. You got the 2 Florida schools, Miami and UCF, and of course, North Carolina rivalries together, NC State and Duke. Now we get to the Eastern Division, and it's almost a good thing with 4 teams. West Virginia, Pitt, Cincinnati, and Louisville. Oh man, that's a nice foursome right there. But we've got nothing to do with Kansas and Kansas State. Where do we put them? Got to keep those 2 together and really have nowhere to go without messing up the other 3 divisions that work so well. So at least we keep Kansas and Kansas State together, and keep in mind that they play in the Big 12 right now and travel all over the place to play these other schools, and they do have some connection over the past 12 or 13 seasons with West Virginia, playing them every season, so there is a connection there. And also keep in mind that Pitt, Cincinnati, Louisville are the furthest Western teams out of the rest of this configuration here that we could really possibly look at. So they are at least further west than anyone in the Atlantic Division. So we keep the continuity across the board. Again, Kansas, Kansas State, misplaced, but at least misplaced together. And then finally, if we're going to elevate this little exercise past fantasy land to reality, we have to take into consideration the physicality of the sport, the limitations of the athletes. We've already expanded the playoffs. There are already going to be 3 to 4 additional games for playoff teams. Therefore, having these mega conferences with needed semifinal games to get to a conference championship game, you can't just pluck 2 teams out of 24 or 20, as we looked at with the Big Ten and the SEC, and determine a valid champion. You could have all sorts of tiebreakers and have illegitimate champions and have all sorts of controversy where you are selecting and elevating a particular team over another one for really no good reason other than maybe they scored more points or had a better point differential or a better record against common opponents. And even that's going to be a difficulty because most of these teams that are competing for conference championship games, it shows us throughout history, typically only have 1 loss. So what happens? The common opponents' record are typically the same, and you got to get down to crazy tiebreakers that involve points scored and point differential. It's a fun exercise. Will the Big 12 expand to that degree? I would love to see the ACC, much like I wanted to see the Pac-12 survive. I want to see an ACC survive past what seems to be the inevitable of Clemson and Florida State moving on, and possibly North Carolina, Virginia, and others. Our expanded Big 12, double the Big 12. Brett Yormark should have all sorts of fun with that logo. With 24, you can play with numbers all over the place and kind of do some kind of double 12. Who knows what they would do with the Big 12 logo then. your comments, your suggestions down below about the format. And hey, we will take logo suggestions as well. Please like the video and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. See you next time.